The Open Highway podcast is a production of Viking Dog Entertainment, and now you can visit the all-new Viking Dog store for access to everything that Viking Dog has to offer. Movies, books, and apparel, including motivational lines, open highway merchandise, and exclusive wolf designs that raise money for wolf rescue organizations. So visit thevikingdogstore.com today.
This episode is brought to you by Our Weird World. Every week, I, John Henson, dive into weird, crazy, and forgotten stories from the history books that you have probably never heard before. I try to put some humor into it, or maybe I just come off sounding like a dick. That's really up for you to decide. But join me every Monday. Subscribe everywhere that you get your podcasts.
And it kind of like, you gotta love Amazon for some things. Other than Bezos and his rocket, you gotta love everything else.
He may turn out to be a benign dictator. So,
do you think?
Well, when he owns us all,
don't you think it's Lex Luthor? Don't you think there's some Lex Luthor in there that he's really like?
He even looks like Lex Luthor.
I'm telling you. So Andy Norman, I got to tell you, one of the reasons that I was really drawn to you, not just what you're studying and what you are getting out there in your book, but one of the things that really blew me away when I listened to you on an interview was you were asked several questions and you were challenged. And when they challenged you, you actually went, let me think about that. And you actually, some things you said, I'm going to go away with that and I'm going to ruminate on it and I'm going to come back. And others, you actually sat there and you went, I didn't think of it like that. And I was really impressed with that, because I think one of the issues that we all have is we get so sunk into our concrete that we're not willing to change. And if we do, we get accused of being flip-floppers.
I better have responded that way, because I'm obliged by my philosophy to make a point of that. I think that it's one of the most important obligations we have, is to rethink our views when others raise good questions or objections.
Yeah.
And then if we've gotten away from that in our present society, I think that might help to explain why things seem to be going crazy these days.
Yeah. So let's get into that, so people know. You have a book called Mental Immunity, and I was telling some people about it. And let's see if I can explain it, and then you can completely correct me. It's the idea that you look at the mind very similarly as how we look at the body, that there are foreign, I'll say, entities that come in, that just like there might be a disease or a parasite, to use your term, that comes into the body, we have the same issue that enters into the mind.
Yeah.
And we have to be able to fight those or deal with them or develop an immunity to it. How'd I do?
That's exactly right. Very nicely done. In fact, I think you should write the sequel.
I'm more of a fiction writer, so I don't know if that's a good.
Go ahead. I'm definitely trying for nonfiction, I have to say.
Yeah, I thought it was really interesting, because you and I talked about this a little bit previously in the pre-interview, but I have a lot of experience with, I'll be right out with it. Someone who was very important in my life went down the conspiracy road, and they have a lot of these issues. And the hardest part for me, and I was going to dive into this later, but I'll just throw it out right there. I'd love to talk to you about not only the mental immunity issues, but I'd also like to talk to you about people who have to deal with that. How do you be somebody who is, it's like having somebody who has an infection. You don't have the infection, but you're caring for them and you're watching it happen, and maybe there's nothing you can do about it. How do you be that person?
I'm really eager to hear your experience with that, because I've haven't had the experience of having a loved one go down a rabbit hole. I've studied the matter from in an academic way, but I'm eager to hear the story.
Am I your case study? You're going to write a paper on me? Will Robert De Niro play me in the movie? You can, Robin Williams would have played you. It's well, without getting into too many details about it, but it's like you have somebody. I always compare it to, and I don't know if this is fair, but I always compare it to being involved with someone who's an alcoholic. And the reason I say that is because you still love them, and you tend to put on blinders and be like, you know what, I'm not going to pay attention to this. I'm not going to pay attention to that because I love them. And that makes it difficult. And there are, and I hope we get into this too, there's collateral damage that happens to you as the person who is with them. And one of the reasons that I even started this show was because I came out of that, and you avoid conflict so much, and you avoid the discussion, and it's almost a lack of parasites, to use yours, because you don't want to be infected by that. So as you come out of the relationship and you start to rebuild who you are, I realized I don't have opinions on anything because I didn't want to have that conflict. So it started to take some time for me to be like, well, how do I feel about this? How do I feel about policing COVID?
So there's a really interesting phenomenon there. You actually sort of purged your mind of ideas that might cause conflict with this woman you cared about in order to get along. And it resulted in blind spots, I guess, even after the relationship ended.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Fascinating.
Have you haven't run across that, or is it not? You concentrate on the thought process. You really concentrate on the workings of the mind, which is fascinating. I haven't gotten all the way through your book, but
I think it doesn't surprise me that people shape their beliefs and their worldviews in order to fit and get along with the people they care about. So one of the things we know about human cognition is that we evolved as highly social critters, and you have to have a bunch of beliefs in common with the people you live with and collaborate with. So if you don't have a shared understanding of the problems you have to solve together and a shared sense of how you're going to approach those problems, imagine our cave-dwelling ancestors, right? Trying to figure out how to go out and hunt a mastodon. There are a whole bunch of things you have to do in sync to pull that off. And it really helps to have a shared understanding of the problem. So so our ancestors probably evolved a need to think alike. And that very same tendency now can get hijacked when we fall prey to groupthink, or in your case, a groupthink in a very small group of two.
Yeah, which we could also almost call, you're leading to codependency at that point.
I was going to say that you were hinting at codependency, and when you say it's like alcoholism, you're also suggesting that it's possible to become addicted to ideas.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely.
Now that's interesting, right?
I'm sorry?
I mean, that's interesting.
It is. And to throw another piece in there, one thing that always drove me absolutely up the wall was every once in a while she was right. No, I mean, and I joke at that, but I mean, there is a part of that where you look at something, a thought process, a way of looking at the world, and even though you care about them and you put those blinders on and you say, okay, well, we always joked is like, well, she could be Imelda Marcos and she could be buying all these expensive shoes. All she is has a different way of looking at the world. How lucky am I? That was the rationalization of it. But every once in a while, one of these crazy theories, and there wasn't so crazy. Every once in a while, there would be one where it'd be like, oh my God, she was right. Wow. So that shakes your, well, okay, but if she was right about this, could she be right about that? And that shakes your foundation a little bit as the other person.
Yeah. So the term conspiracy theory is used pejoratively. It means, kooky way of thinking about it. But the fact is, people do sometimes conspire. Human beings have been known to conspire. So not every belief that a conspiracy is happening is imagined. So some conspiracy theories are in fact borne out. But I think that the problem here is that fears can spiral out of control. When you start to think that a group of people are conspiring to control your reality, then you can interpret almost anything as them attempting to manipulate your reality.
Mm-hmm.
And because you can explain almost anything and explain almost anything away with a theory like that, there are very few checks and balances to make sure that that kind of thinking is rational. It's really hard to think clearly when you're driven by fears that an insidious, sneaky cabal is manipulating everything you see and hear.
Right.
I mean, philosophers have an ancient version of this problem. René Descartes, the French philosopher, basically said, what if there's a powerful demon that's basically just feeding me a huge illusion about reality. Mm-hmm. He was basically this is the 17th century version of the Matrix.
Right. It's the great deceiver argument, isn't that what it's?
Exactly.
Yeah, I remember my college philosophy a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, but what philosophers have discovered is that it's not hard to generate hypotheses that provide an alternative explanation for everything you take for granted.
Yeah.
So maybe you're a purple armadillo on Mars that's hallucinating the whole thing. What evidence do you have that that's not true? Well, you can't have evidence for that because it's built into the hypothesis.
And that's always one of the arguments, and not just in that situation, but I run into it with a lot of people. It's you can't prove the negative. You can't, or you don't know what I know, or there's always some sort of go-to. And sometimes it feels like, it feels like you can't win that argument. You like, no matter what you say, there's going to be something that's going to be put up. And I don't know if it's a fear-based thing that they might be proven wrong. Is it, they think they're more intellectual than you. Then you've heard the sheeple term that gets thrown out there. It's like, well, you're one of the plebes. You're one of the ones who just don't really understand how everything works. And you're even beyond it being insulting.
Yeah, all you guys are just sheeple, and you're being played by the conspiracists.
Exactly.
But we see through past their illusions, so we're genuinely free. I mean, you can see how seductive that thought might be, right?
Yeah.
It's a heady thought that you belong to an elite group of people who can see through a vast illusion and see the truth. I think part of the best psychology on conspiracy theories credits the seductiveness of those ideas with one of the reasons they lodge in people's minds and refuse to budge.
Where does that come from, do you think, because there's always that, I mean, I personally have seen it, and I don't know if it's on a wider scale, is the idea that there has to be a reason for the things that are happening to me. Like if something horrible happens to somebody, there has to be a reason for it. And I think there's various versions of it. I remember after 9/11, I interviewed Barbara Mickelson, who is she founded Snopes.com.
Yeah.
And she and I had a really wonderful conversation, and I was like, well, why are these conspiracy theories popping up? And it was like a couple weeks, and they were already all over the place. And she explained it. She said, well, human beings have to have order in the universe or else they'll go crazy. They have to be able to a certain degree go, I understand why this is happening.
Right.
So on a wider scale, there's that. And then on a smaller scale, it's like, oh, well, I can't get a job. I can't, my spouse died, or this happened, or that bad. Well, it's because the imaginary group did this to me, or it's because of this group or whatever. As humans, we seem to have to do that.
Well, I think there's a very strong tendency in that direction, but I don't think it's fair to say that we're all equally prone to that kind of self-delusion. So one of the things I know psychologists have been talking about lately is that when we see something big happen, we imagine that if the effect is big, we imagine that the cause must be big as well.
Right.
So the Twin Towers fell, for crying out loud. There's no way that 19 Saudis could have done that. There's no way a little tiny group led by Osama bin Laden could pull off such a mammoth undertaking. He had to have, support insiders in the US government or something like that. Yeah. But the fact is there are many, many phenomena in the world where a small trigger creates a big effect. We just think about the Black Plague, right? That was a germ that jumped from an animal species, I think, to the human species, and then spread like wildfire. We think of wildfire itself starts small, right, and it spreads right out of control. So you can get disproportionate effects for small outcomes, and that kind of balks. It's hard to get your head around that because we want to feel as though outcomes are proportionate to inputs. Yeah. And when your whole life feels like it's failing or in a really dark place, you want to piece together, I think we all need to piece together a story that to some extent absolves us of responsibility for the way things have worked out.
It's kind of the caveman looking out into the night sky going, well, there must be reason to these lights and I can't be alone, or which we still do. We have to draw the dots. There has to be order. Yeah. We don't deal with chaos as human beings. We don't deal with that very well.
Right. And your example is a beautiful one because the constellation. So I think many different cultures around the world have found constellations, very different constellations in the same pattern of stars. And what that suggests is that our brains are sort of pattern recognition engines. We'd like to sort an apparently random thing into meaningful patterns. And sometimes we'll impose patterns that really aren't there. Yeah. So 3 or 4 bad things happen. Ooh, there must be a single shadowy cabal that explains them all. It's the same need to bring more order to the facts than there really is.
Do you, in your studies and as you've been putting together your, I don't want to say theories, because I feel like they're more than theories. It's a path, and I'm still learning. I heard the interviews and I'm reading the book, and I just really find it fascinating, the idea that we need to look at the mind differently. We need to look at the thought process. And just background for you, anybody who knows me knows I'm an atheist, and then so I have my belief system, and I'm sure we'll touch on that. But as you put this together, are you a student of history as well? Do you look back in history about how people have thought as you put this together? Is this a long-term thing? I mean, how does that play out?
The project? No,
the history. We'll deal with the project, but definitely like as you look at history and the mankind and their thought process.
So I'm not trained as a historian, but because I went deep into some really interesting philosophical questions, I had to learn about the history of those ideas. And so intellectual history, the history of how ideas have shaped Western civilization, is a major theme, in particular of chapter 11 of the book. So in that chapter, I tell the story about how certain assumptions about what is reasonable have actually spread through cultures and dramatically reshaped those cultures. So during, at the start of the Middle Ages, the idea that faith-based believing is the only way to go, that faith-based believing is a good idea, that spread far and wide, got the support of some powerful people, spread through Europe, and it created an age over 1,000 years where dogma and superstition reigned, disease spread wildly, science languished, and human suffering was just almost unimaginable by today's standards. And then at the end of that period, the idea that our beliefs should be based on evidence came to the fore again. spread through Europe and caused a transformation in Western civilization that we today call the Enlightenment. And it led to science and engineering and democratic forms of government and vaccines and so many of the other things that make our lives safer and more comfortable today.
And now we've gotten to a point where I blame the internet. I think it's a wonderful, amazing thing. But definitely it's handing that fire to that caveman, and I don't think he was quite ready to handle it, because now everybody has an opinion, but honestly, I don't think we need to be hearing everybody's opinion. Some of them, maybe it's something to think about before you start spouting it off on the internet.
I agree with you completely, Eric. It seemed to me to be a really good thing to democratize speech by giving everybody. Right. So for a long time, certain elites controlled the gateways to broadcast media, right? The people in Hollywood, the editors at big newspapers. These are the people who had an outsized influence on public opinion. And so it seemed to me to be a step in the right direction to create an internet where anybody could broadcast their views. But it turns out I didn't foresee the dark side of that. There's an awful lot of kooky ideas that spread in essentially a viral fashion across the internet. And we're so far from being prepared for this. And there's some serious signs right now that this could damage our civilization irreparably. And we need to act fast, I think, to end what I call the great infodemic.
There's so many problems with the mass amounts of information that's out there. When I was a reporter at the Chicago Tribune with the city news desk, and one of the mantras that was drilled into us by the editor was, if your mother says she loves you, check it out. You literally have it drilled into you that you need sources, you need multiple sources, you need to double check them, you need to list them. We weren't even allowed to do deep background. Everything had to be out in the forefront. If somebody has an article, or if they want to say something, they just have to find someone who's agreeing with them. It doesn't have to be factual. And if there are so many different views out there, it just takes you 5 minutes to find somebody who agrees with you. It doesn't mean it's right.
There you go. Good. And I love your editor's advice on that. And I learned a similar lesson when I was living in Chicago. I went to grad school just north of Chicago, and I used to take the train down into the city to catch some of the blues shows. And
Kingston Mines?
Kingston Mines, yeah. So it might have been Kingston Mines where I heard a blues musician, might have been Sun Seals or something, sing a song that basically, one of the lyrics was, "Nobody loves you but your mama, and she might be jiving."
Yep. It's the same. Maybe that's where Paul found that. It's been around a while, but I think we need a little more of that. Maybe we need some more jazz songs to give us some advice on life. But to go back to that, it's and I've talked about this with various guests, and I think it's becoming one of my my little things that I'm investigating. But so we have not only the internet and the ability to find all of these opinions, but now you have social media and Facebook and all these, it's the infamous algorithms where you aren't surrounded by people who have thoughts that force you to question your own. You're surrounded by people who are just like you, so that reinforces your thoughts and it tribalizes everything so much more, which goes back to what you were saying about cavemen, or we needed to be around people who said, we are going to hunt, we are going to take care of each other. But now it's, we believe in QAnon, we believe Fauci. On the other end, we believe Fauci is a saint, and hopefully the truth is, well, I don't know, somewhere in the middle with QAnon, but like somewhere in there is fact. But we're not searching for the facts, we're searching for people who agree with us.
And so the tendency, psychologists have a word for the tendency to go out in search of evidence that just validates your point of view. It's called confirmation bias. And it turns out that we all have a tendency we all like to feel right. We all like to feel validated. And so we actively look for information that reinforces our views, and we tend to brush off or dismiss or information that challenges or suggests a need to revise our views. So I think what the moral of that story is that we need to deliberately try to mitigate our own desire to be validated all the time. We need to deliberately seek out other points of view. We need to welcome interesting challenges and objections and say, wow, I had never thought about that. You might be right. Let me think this through, because if you're right, I got a lot of learning I need to do.
Yeah.
So help me think this through.
And don't we also, do you think that we also need to support people when they do evolve or when they do change their mind? Because like I said at the top of all this, we seem, what's the Mitt Romney? He flip-flopped. John Kerry. He flip-flopped. He changed. He's like, no, I developed an opinion based on certain things. I don't believe the same things I did when I was 7. If I did, I'd be institutionalized. And I don't mean to be light about that, but it's a fact. If I believed in Santa Claus at my age, or if I believed in the Tooth Fairy, or if I believed that the world was, a certain way, I would be ostracized and institutionalized. But we don't support that evolution unless even if it's science, we don't always support that,
We like to think that just sticking by, there's a certain admiration I think many of us have for people who stick by their guns, who have their principles and stick to them. And perseverance in the face of adversity is something we're prone to admire. Well, what about perseverance in the face of ideational diversity or adversity? Sorry, what about persistence in the face of objections and challenges and disturbances to your worldview? Well, psychologists have actually done an amazing amount of research on what they call the difference between the fixed mindset, which says this is what I'm going to believe and I'm sticking with it no matter what, and the growth mindset, which is that, maybe I need to rethink that, or at least tweak that view a little bit, or rephrase it differently for it to really be right, because I can keep learning and becoming a better version of myself if I remain open and willing to change. It turns out that people who have the growth mindset experience better life outcomes on like 10 different dimensions. They become wealthier, they become happier, their marriages last longer, they're more open, they're more fun to be around, they're less bitter, they're less angry. So one of the best things you can do to improve your own quality of life is to let go of the need to be right, let go of the fixed mindset.
Yeah. The marriage thing is interesting. I think the marriage thing is an amazing, amazing example of it, because I was married for 16 years. And aside from everything else that we talked about, she and I were definitely not the same people when we got married as when we were when we divorced. Just like any couple will tell you, you hear it all the time. What's the term? We grew apart.
Grew apart. So
And
growth can be disruptive, right?
It can, but that's a great example, because if you look at somebody and I've heard this one too. You're like, well, she doesn't look the same way she did when I married her. Well, no, she's 15 years older and she's had a couple kids and she's had...
and you know what, buddy, you don't look the same either.
But I think it's a great example. I think that's an example we can look at it, be like, here is showing, we change as people. Do you still love them? Do you accept the growth? Is it good growth? Is it bad growth? But I think it's a nice example of what you said. Mm-hmm. So how do we deal with, there's got to be a line where we as a society say, let's use, was it you that did the flat earth joke?
Yeah, that was me.
Oh,
yeah.
Can you tell the flat earth joke? Because I love this, and I told to someone the other day, and I would just love to hear you tell it.
Thanks. I'll tell the joke, and then we can riff on it a little bit, because it's, I think it sheds interesting light on the human mind.
Yeah.
So Fred the flat earther dies, and he goes to heaven, and he gets ushered into God's inner sanctum, and he says, God, I've been a flat earther my entire life. I now here at the end, I have to know, is the world flat or is it round? God goes, Fred, the world is very round. And Fred looks at him and says, this conspiracy goes higher than I thought.
See, I told someone that the other day. And so there are people, you're not going to change. You're just not. How do we deal with them when society, and there's the argument and the discussion about, okay, there's certain things we should be talking about. We should have an open discussion back and forth, but there's certain things where it's like, no, oh, good grief, that's not true. So as a society, do we need to draw the line and just be like, look, your views are not acceptable. Maybe acceptable is not the right word, but your views are not the norm. And we need to call you out on that and say, this is not a healthy society that believes in that. But then what are those? There's so much of a discussion in there. And you mentioned thought police in your book.
Right. Well, I'm of the opinion, so you can be too concerned to hunt down and rid the world of bad ideas, and that can lead to thought police. But you can not be concerned enough about it while you sit by, twiddle your thumbs, and let white supremacist ideas spread around you, or other disastrous ideas spread. So yes, we've been so concerned about thought police that all of us shy away from trying to enforce the norms of accountable talk, enforce the norms of responsible thinking. Now, by enforce, I don't mean at the point of a gun. I mean, if somebody is spouting bullshit, you call them on it.
Right.
We've become kind of allergic to calling people on their bullshit in our society because we don't want to offend. We want to get along. We're conflict avoidant. Mm-hmm. And my grandmother once told me, never discuss politics or religion in polite company. Well, that was a good rule of thumb if you just wanted to not offend anyone. But if enough people do that for enough generations, then divergent worldviews start to form and harden, and you end up with a highly polarized society that's practically ready to at each other's jugular veins. So I actually think we need to talk politics and religion, and we need to call out each other's bullshit, and we need to somehow do that in a humane, compassionate way that involves real listening and real openness to learning from what the other side has to teach us.
So let me throw out this example. So smoking, trust me, I'm going somewhere with this.
All right.
Smoking over I remember when I was a kid, I have a feeling we're kind of in the same age group. You remember when people could smoke on planes, they could smoke in the office, it's good for you. That was a little bit before us, but it was very prevalent. And then as a society, not only did we start making laws, and that's a different part of it, but we started pressuring people societally, saying we don't accept this. We don't like it. If you're gonna be outside, and then you go even further, and it's like, oh my God, you smell like smoke or whatever. And as a society, we began to evolve past it, and we still have it. And it did take some government action, laws and stuff. But as a society, we evolved mentally. Is that cognitively?
Sure.
What would be the right term for that? Is that the same kind of thing then that we could do?
Yeah. No, I think those are fine words for it. So the government did play a role in regulating the sale and marketing of cigarettes, and I think that was a justifiable use of government power. Now, today's libertarian types would balk at it because they're against any form of government regulation. But we've saved millions of people's lives that way and prevented lung cancer in millions of people. But it's not just the government. As you point out, that very salutary social transformation involved a lot of people just using moral pressure, saying, hey, buddy, can you put that out? My kid's sitting right there. I don't want my kid to get cancer because of you, right? I mean, that's kind of a in-your-face way to put it. And I myself am conflict avoidant enough so that I would find a gentler way to say that. It's like, excuse me, sir, would you mind putting out that cigarette? I'm not comfortable with the health effects that might be having on my children who are sitting 10 feet from you.
Right. And so let me grab a third rail to continue this subject then. So let's talk about religion. So religion, in many ways, there are people who need it. There are people who truly believe, and I have no issue if somebody wants to believe in something, if that's how they shape their life, if they're a good person. It's when they get in my face and they're like, you need to believe this too. That bothers me. And then the other thing that bothers me is when my government starts telling me that the religion is part of my government. And I'm like, I can show you so many reasons that it's not. We won't even get into the God we trust on the money. But, when you start saying that a church has political power, when you start saying that they shouldn't have to pay taxes, there's all of these areas. It's the same kind of thing. If as a society, if we kind of look at it and have the discussion and say, okay, is this how we want religion to play into our supposedly non-religious government? But we don't have that discussion. And then suddenly you're a godless communist. You're an anti-establishmentarian. You're this and that. But I know that I heard in the interview, you were talking a little bit about how to do that, how to and it touches back on the cigarette thing. That's kind of why I used that as a segue.
Yeah.
Well,
what do you think? I have many religious friends, and I'm not out there trying to browbeat them with my arguments for atheism. I don't think that's a good thing for relationships. I don't believe that God exists, and I'm not even sure what it means to say that God exists. Mm-hmm. But I've come around. I mean, for much of my life, I've been, a non-believer, happy to coexist with believers. And in the last 30 years or so, I've watched as ardent evangelicals have become increasingly political, who've been putting pressure on the church-state separation wall, advocating for policies that I think are wrong-headed, for anything from opposing family planning, resources for family planning, which might have helped address our overpopulation problem. Evangelicals vote overwhelmingly for candidates that I think are unfit for office. A lot of faith-based believing, I think, paves the way for wrong-headed policy. Mm-hmm. So I'm increasingly of the opinion that when you defy basic standards of accountable, evidence-based believing for your private, personal pleasure or comfort, that you're actually sowing the seeds for more destructive ideologies down the road. Mm-hmm. So when we raise our children to believe that faith is a virtue, you're actually teaching them that a certain kind of closed-mindedness is okay. And then they bring that closed-mindedness to their politics, and all of a sudden you've got a political faction that just refuses to listen.
And they say that too. They say, well, that's what I believed since I was this high.
End of discussion, right?
Yeah, yeah.
And well, you can't have a well-functioning democracy when a third of the populace brings that attitude with it into political discourse. And to the extent that religion is responsible for promoting that attitude, yeah, I think it's objectively morally problematic.
Well, it's not really any different than somebody saying, well, I vote Democrat or I vote Republican because not that I believe what the person stands for. It's just that's my party. So it's like I vote for him because he said he's a Christian. I vote for him because he's a Catholic or whatever it may be.
That's right. And so I don't mean to single out religious ideologies here. There are secular ideologies that are equally inflexible and dogmatic and problematic. In fact, anytime any set of beliefs becomes inflexible and change resistant or resistant to rational updating, So when new evidence flows in, the people who are really good at modeling the world in their heads and predicting what will happen, the people who are really good at that are, whenever they notice a piece of information that surprises them, even a little bit, they take in that information and they adjust their confidence levels of 2 or 3 beliefs just to kind of make sure they're probably a little bit closer to right.
Yeah.
And they do this just continually on an ongoing basis. And when you do that, your model of the world becomes more intricate, more subtle, more nuanced, more accurate, better for predicting, better for problem solving, and more flexible, more supple.
So just so we can have a discussion on it without getting too far into the weeds on religion or politics, as much as I love to do that, can you throw me a parasite that is a little more, I don't want to say benign. I'm kind of being funny when I say that, but I mean something that's a little more discussable that we're not going to irritate too many people. So what's an example of a parasite that's a little more along the road?
So let me offer this bit of background for your listeners. One of the controversial claims I make in the book is that bad ideas are, for all practical purposes, mind parasites.
Okay.
And so almost nobody talks about mind parasites, but we all see memes spread across the internet. We've all seen ideas and political ideologies form and morph and spread. So it's pretty clear that ideas can kind of take on a life of their own. Mm-hmm. And some of them don't serve their human hosts well. And I think we need to, you mentioned at the beginning that I think we need to look at the mind differently. I think we tend to have this idea that our minds are like these command posts. Our conscious minds are like these, the command center, and we are in control of its contents. We choose what to believe or not, or we choose which ideas to let in or not, or which ideas to wield. But if you actually study the way the human mind works, it's the far murkier picture. Our ideas are actually busy reshaping our minds and changing the way we think. And some of them are harmful. I mean, take the idea that smoking is good for you, okay, or that it's okay to have another pack of cigarettes. I'll quit later.
It's the 5 years at the end of my life. That's what I'm going to lose. That's what my friends always said. I'll pick it up at the end.
Well, many people have had the following thought. It won't hurt too much if I have another cigarette now. I'll quit later. That idea, if you let it take up residence in your mind, can end up can pave the way for lung cancer. Mm-hmm. Right? Now, is that idea parasitic? Well, if you host it, if you believe it, or let it affect your behavior, it can end up harming you. And there's no scientific doubt that the wrong ideas can harm you. The idea that it's stepping off a cliff and that you can float gently to the ground after stepping off a cliff is an idea that would probably kill you. Yeah. There are many ideas that are objectively bad for people. Sometimes they're bad because they harm the host themselves, and sometimes they're bad because they get a host to harm others.
So it's always interesting when I hear the interview, reading your book, and especially talking to you now, it makes so much sense, the idea of a mind parasite, to the point where my brain, maybe it's just because I'm a wacky creative type, but in my mind, I literally have to stop myself and be like, okay, it's a mental thing. It's not like I have this image of like little worms or something like in my mind, like Star Trek 2 with they put the thing in the ear,
Yeah,
but
I've never experienced the idea in that visceral way.
It amazes me. It's the writer in me, the fiction writer. But something that just popped into my head, that was a bad thing to say, something that just popped up is, so let's use your smoking example. Somebody has this mind parasite of smoking isn't that bad for me, I'll be okay. Well,
actually, let me give you just a slightly different variation. Smoking is cool. Let's go with smoking is
cool. Perfect. Love it. Smoking's cool. that can open up for other mind parasites to then come in. Because if you're like, oh, well, I'm smoking, smoking's cool, it's okay that I can't breathe as well. Well, I don't have to go to the gym. It's going to the gym stupid, whatever. And then I can eat a little bit worse. And suddenly so is that the breakdown?
So I think you've just put your finger on a really interesting fact, which is that mind parasites attract others of their kind. So if you harbor some bad ideas, they tend to pave the way for other ones to come on board as well. Anything that fits in well with the beliefs already on board are going to be more likely to stick themselves.
Yeah.
So embrace a small set of beliefs that are kind of just at odds with reality. Oh, climate change is a hoax, or no, you know what? Science is a big conspiracy. Yeah. Let that idea infect your mind, and other mind parasites will pour in and turn your worldview upside down.
Which is really interesting that you say that, because if we go back to the person that we were talking about, the conspiracy minded person, one thing that always came up was I'd hear a couple different conspiracy theories. I'm like, well, you realize that theory completely is at odds with this theory. Like literally, they're like, they cannot both exist at the same time. And one thing that was always said to me was, oh, well, I'm just entertaining the possibility. I'm exploring and open to possibilities. And I'm like, well, now that you say that, it's like that kind of clicks in a whole different way.
Well, and of course, considering possibilities, entertaining hypotheses is critical to science. It's critical to thinking. So the ability to say, well, what about this possibility? Let's take that seriously. What could we do to either validate or invalidate that? That's good scientific practice. That's good critical thinking. But you can also raise possibilities in ways that unhinge minds. So think about the way Tucker Carlson says, well, I'm not claiming anything here. I'm just exploring certain possibilities. But what if X was really part of a deep state plot to do this, right? Or when Trump says, well, a deep state cabal is a deep cabal of Satan worshiping pedophiles has hijacked.
I'm just saying.
That's what he says.
China.
Perfect. Thank you. That was the exact expression, right? It's possible. I hear some people.
It's always these people. I'm like, who are these people?
But what this shows is that you can just float possibilities and confuse people.
Yeah.
You don't even the possibilities don't even have to be right. They don't have to be serious. They don't have to be well evidenced. They don't have to be responsibly formed. If you throw them out there, you can create enough. In fact, Steve Bannon, Trump's right-hand guy during his first winning campaign, basically said, we're flooding the zone with shit, meaning that they're sending so much disinformation out into the public, into the infosphere, into public space, that people just get confused and then they give up on the truth. And he says, well, at least that bastard's on my side. I'm going to vote for him.
Which, in all fairness, that's not just Trump. That's not just the right. That's not just whoever you. I mean, Democratic Party got caught a couple days ago. The Lincoln Project got caught doing the same thing. So, and I worked in politics for a small amount of time, and I saw what kind of went on, and I ran. I literally ran away because I'm like, wow, it's so bad. But yeah, that's kind of the MO, is like just throw as much out there. It's the old throw the spaghetti at the wall, see what sticks, but we're throwing something other than spaghetti. That's the
well, I think we've got people trying to weaponize information, and also people trying to weaponize doubt. And there has been very little talk, I think, so far, recognition of the fact that you can weaponize questions and doubts. We tend to think of, questions and doubts, those are essential to critical thinking, and that's what I do. And we all need to ask more questions and harbor more doubts and be more skeptical. Well, it turns out that being insufficiently skeptical is one way to end up with a bunch of bad beliefs.
I think we live in that world right now.
But there are also many people who are too skeptical for their own good. I mean, think about Fred the Flat Earther, right?
Right.
He's sitting there staring God in the face, and he's saying, "This conspiracy goes higher than I thought." The doubts in Fred's mind have become so all-consuming that he has no sense of perspective left.
There was one thing I really wanted. It's on my note sheet, which I haven't been paying attention to. I haven't had to, which is nice. But one thing I wanted to ask you about was projecting. If you have this kind of issue, if you have the mind parasites, if you're dealing with these things, it has to affect how you see other people. And we have the obvious one is we talked about a little bit is conspiracy people always like, well, you're an idiot because you don't understand what I believe. But that's not exactly projection, because it's not taking their own self-doubt and putting onto somebody. But if you have these thoughts and these are eating away at your mind, you are going to take your issues and throw them onto other people and project them, I would think.
Well, one of the themes I develop in my book is that we've been raised with the idea that everyone is entitled to their opinion. Mm-hmm. And built into that view that belief is fundamentally a private thing. My beliefs are my business. Your beliefs are your business. Get your evidence off of my beliefs because your evidence and arguments aren't welcome here, because belief is private. I'm entitled to mine. I think that's fundamentally a wrong view, because our beliefs have implications for the way we behave, mm-hmm. and they end up helping or harming others. So if you believe irresponsibly, you're sowing the seeds of your own. You become more capable of harming others the more irresponsible believing you indulge in. I think we need to put an end to the myth that everyone is entitled to believe whatever they damn please, because there are lots of beliefs out there that are objectively harmful to humanity, and it's time we woke up and said that.
How do we talked a little about this, but how do we go about that? How do we go about that in a way that's not only acceptable, the way that people will respond to in a healthy way, but that, there's the argument, we have what's these are my God-given rights, which is kind of ironic, but mm-hmm. how do you move forward with that in a way that's healthy for society as a whole?
Right. Well, it's a big question, and it's a hard problem. So here's a wrong way to do it, is to assume that you have the right ideas, that the ideas that inhabit your mind are symbionts. They're the good ones. Mm-hmm. And the ideas that inhabit the minds of those who disagree with you, they're the infected minds, and those are the mind parasites. So don't assume that all the mind parasites are in them and none of the mind parasites are in us, because it doesn't work that way. Every single one of us harbors ideas that are serving us poorly. Mm-hmm. Both individually and collectively. And that means every single one of us has room to grow by spotting and shedding suboptimal ideas. Now, I think that this concept of mind parasite and the idea that we can strengthen our mind's immunity to mind parasites, I think that has a lot of potential to help us develop better critical thinking skills. And so I look forward to the day in the future when this new science that I call cognitive immunology, it's basically the science of how minds fight off misinformation. Yeah. Spot misinformation and reject it or remove it from the mind. How does that work? And when it fails, why does it fail? And how can we make those mental immune systems work better? So that's the agenda. Now, I just one more thing, and you need to speak. That's a useful framework for understanding how we can address the great infodemic of our time. It can give us scientific tools for understanding this wacky post-truth world we now live in. But that doesn't mean I foreground the idea of mind infection when I'm trying to have a constructive dialogue with somebody I disagree with. I don't accuse them of having an infected mind. That's not a constructive way to engage with people.
Right.
I keep their humanity, their need for to be treated with dignity in the foreground. And I gently try to use usually clarifying questions just to help them see things that they might have missed.
Well, isn't it, if we head into any discussion, it doesn't matter if it's you and I sitting here or, somebody that you're talking to on the bus, or I mentioned having coffee and you're like, well, having a beer at the bar. Yeah. If we head into that conversation and instead of thinking, I am going to show this person how I think and I'm going to convince them, if we headed into that conversation thinking, I might learn something out of this and have more of that open mind, and maybe you will, maybe you won't, but no matter what, you're going to learn something because you're interacting with somebody else. You're going to learn their favorite color, if nothing else, if it's the littlest thing, or you may come up with a whole new view of the world.
You've said that beautifully, and you've just articulated, I think, nicely the right attitude to bring to controversy, to learning, to life. Yeah. So I think it's important to really listen and understand first before you jump to conclusions and start to criticize.
Do we need to teach this? Like, is this a school situation where we need to change the actual schooling and education system?
Absolutely. And one of the most important things we can be teaching is listening skills.
I don't listen to you. What'd you say?
Apparently, I've got somebody in mind already. So, you're actually a very good listener, and I enjoy conversation with
but people. I think we do teach listening, but we teach listening in a way where it's just memorization and taking in facts. We don't teach conversational listening unless you're an actor and you're taught listen. But
I see what you're getting at with that. Here's the way. So when I was a young professor, I wasn't a very good teacher, and I happened to take a mediation course. And part of the mediation training was learning how to listen actively. Mm-hmm. And just be completely present and honed in on what the person is saying, to the point where you can express their view as well as or better than they can. I learned that, and it just blew me away what a difference that made for my teaching and for my conversations, my ability to have constructive conversations.
Yeah.
So one of the things my instructor taught me is that of the 4 big communication modes, reading, writing, speaking, and listening, which one do you think we do the most?
Reading, writing, listening,
and speaking.
I think we do. I think speaking would be I think we do the most speaking. I think I'm wrong.
Well, this guy said, I think, not implausibly, that we listen more than we speak.
Really?
That we spend more time listening.
Oh, maybe okay. Not well, yeah. I hear what you're saying.
At least more time hearing.
We have more input.
Yeah, it's something we spend more time doing than either of the other 3. But of those 4, which one do we teach the least? The same one. The one we do the most is the one we teach the least. But I like your way of putting it. There's a kind of passive learning where you're just listening with half of your attention and jotting things into your notebook.
Yeah.
That's not what I'm really talking about here. I'm talking about the kind of deep conversational listening. That's an important skill. And we need to teach it.
It reminds me, I was an ESL teacher for a while, and I went to Korea and I taught ESL in Korea. Mm-hmm. And the way they teach English is not the way that we teach English here. The way they do it is by memorization. And so I was teaching a group of students, and I was given a book. And they go, here's the book they're going to learn from, like just a storybook. And I went, oh, okay, wonderful. So I had two classes. It was a bizarre situation where I had in the afternoon, I had high school, college prep. And in the morning I had 7 and 8 year olds. It was the most bizarre like day of any job. But the 7 and 8 year olds, they gave me this book. We worked, I read it with them. We worked on it. And like the next day I'm like, okay, what book for today? And they're like, oh, no. That storybook is your book for the entire course. By the end, they should have it memorized. And they should just be able to recite the entire, see Dick run, see Dick. And I'm like, but you're not teaching them to think. You're not teaching them to communicate. You're just teaching them to regurgitate these ideas. And they said, that's how we teach. And
Yeah.
it seems close to the same thing where we just teach people to be like, take in the information, don't process it, don't put it through. And then we get to college, especially now. And we come back to the idea that we talked about where people are, it's like, well, your opinion matters. And your opinion matters, and your opinion matters, and your opinion matters, and your everything, and you're all different, and you all should be able to coincide. But you can't do that. If someone walks out and like the sky is blue, well, I think it's an off blue. Well, I think it's actually closer to green. Who's right? And we argue about it. Wars start.
Well, I mean, for much of our schooling is rote, and I think the one way I put it in the book is that for much of our life, for the first maybe 20 years of our lives, we're treated as knowledge receptacles, as passive containers for information. I mean, what a demeaning, what a degrading way to treat people. When I finally got to college and was suddenly, asked to think for myself, where I was actually challenged and taught to think on my feet, man, to me, it was like revelatory. It was like, why the hell haven't I been doing this since middle school?
Yeah.
I think we should be teaching kids to wrestle with philosophical questions about politics and ethics and religion. I'm not in favor of the dogmatic teaching of religion in public elementary schools, but I think teaching kids about different religious views and letting them make up their own minds.
Can you imagine?
Would be cool.
Can you imagine, like, just that would help in so many ways, not just even the religious aspect of it, but to let them from a young age know that there are other ways of thinking and know that there are other ways of just looking at the world. I mean, how many times were you told this growing up? You live in the United States, you live in the greatest country in the world, and every other person in the world wishes they were you. And they wish they lived here. And then you go to other countries and they're like, no, they love their country. They love everything about where they are. There's some people that are under the thumb of something and wish they had, a little more freedom, but how egotistical to say that.
And the American exceptionalism, like we're God's gift to countries or whatever.
We've gotten pretty good at that. We have a couple hundred years of practice. What are we, come 300, give or take 100 years old. And who are we to take something away from a country that's been around for 2,000 years? They don't know what they're talking about. They don't have any experience.
Here is one place I'm prepared to credit America's founders with. So the American Revolution happened on the heels of about 150 years of religious warfare in Europe. A lot of the American colonists were refugees from the religious wars that racked between Protestants and Catholics. Protestants killing Catholics, Catholics killing Protestants for about 150 years. It was just brutal. Like a third of all of Europe were killed in those wars. People were so weary of faith. Many of them came to America, and when the time came to draft a constitution, they were like, we're going to keep religion out of our politics. If you want to have a belief, religious belief, fine. Just don't impose it on anybody else. We're going to create a secular government to mediate between different worldviews, and so we can all coexist. I think that was a beautiful gift to posterity. that core idea. Now, American democracy was imperfect in many ways. It didn't give women the right to vote or blacks the right to vote for a very, very long time. We can criticize it all day for that, and I'm happy to. But there are ideas that are intrinsic to America's original conception that I think are hugely admirable and have helped to promote the well-being of American citizens.
That is an interesting point that you bring up about those things, slavery and the right to vote and all of those issues, because that comes back to our discussion about the evolving of the mind and the evolving of the way of looking at the world. We're not the same people we were 200 plus years ago. We have evolved not only as people, but as a nation. So here's a case study of why we should be able to look at the world and be like, well, yeah, we believe that gay people should be able to marry. We didn't believe that 10, 15 years ago. We evolved societally.
Yes. And this analogy is really nice for a couple of reasons. Think about the US Constitution. It basically says, all right, there's this Constitution, which is a framework that needs to be regarded with even more reverence than just the ordinary everyday laws that Congress passes. They're like meta laws that should be especially hard to change. But the founders were also foresightful enough to build in a mechanism for adding amendments to the Constitution. Right? It was built as meant to be a living document, a document that could change with the times. And that was one of the most important insights that the founders had, is that, ideas and even political constitutions need to evolve with the times. So we have to make it somewhat flexible. Now, the fact that the Bill of Rights, right? Everyone has a right to free speech. Those are very important principles that should not be tossed aside lightly. Our openness to change shouldn't be so indiscriminate that we're ready to chuck the First Amendment at the drop of a hat. That would be a mistake. But it's also possible to amend the Constitution and in ways that allow us to evolve as a nation. We need to conduct our cognitive affairs in exactly the same way. That our core beliefs, we need to hold on to those carefully, but not too tightly. You need to be willing to part with, or at least modify, even your core beliefs.
Now, we're veering off into politics a little bit, and I'm going to drag you that way as long as you opened up that door.
All right.
Is there a point where a group of a society, because of these ways of looking at the world, their ways of cognitive thinking, are so different that they cannot coexist? We go back to that tribal thing that we talked about with, like, we all want to hunt. Well, right. We all want to hunt animals, but another group says we only want to eat plants. Well, can they coexist? And I'm simplifying it and kind of making a little fun of vegans, but is there a point where you literally have to look at each other and be like, us staying together because a relationship or a country? Is there a point where you have to draw the line and you say, we are not good for each other? Is it a codependent nation, or is it a situation that's unsustainable because the thought process is so different? Civil war could be talked about, although there were other issues definitely in that.
Yeah, so great question. So I'm a big fan of tolerance. I think there needs to be a huge amount of willingness to let other people live their lives the way that needs to be a pretty core principle. Everyone should be presumed to know best how to live their life. That's an important principle. And it's also easy to imagine worldviews developing that are fundamentally antithetical to a healthy democracy. So imagine a significant contingent of Americans came to believe the following things: you and people like you are subhuman. You really don't deserve rights. Mm-hmm. And furthermore, they're not interested in altering that view because nothing would change their minds about that. Mm-hmm. Now, if a significant group of Americans believed these things, they would become complete parasites on our democracy. They could blow it up.
Yeah. It's the school test. It's the famous the teacher who did the test with her students. Remember that one? It was in the 60s where she did a test to teach her kids about that. And she picked someone who said, okay, I think it was all the blue-eyed students will be able to tell the brown-eyed students what to do. And they had to wear collars. And it was like, it fell into this power thing within a day or two. And they started abusing the other students because they said, well, they're dumber. And they suddenly were given the power.
Yeah,
it's
that
the
was
same thing.
A fascinating experiment that was shocking in its outcome. So you can, if you teach kids, divide kids into two groups based on some arbitrary thing. You give half of them red poker chips and the other half of them green poker chips. And then you give them a little bit of coaching about the superiority of their group to the other group. They'll start to dehumanize each other. Given a little latitude, they'll start to dehumanize each other pretty quickly over the completely arbitrary tribal differences. This is a really scary aspect of human nature that suggests that we need to be really careful with the tribes we affiliate with and the identities we form. It's so easy to say, I'm a Democrat, I'm a Republican, I'm a Christian, I'm an atheist. And you know what? And that's my truth and I'm sticking to it. And I'm going to fight like hell for my truth.
Yeah.
Not a healthy attitude. And if everybody believed and conducted their affairs that way, we would beat each other's throats all the time.
So let me ask you one thing. We'll start wrapping this up. But one thing that I'm curious now. Are you optimistic? Are you optimistic about all of this? Do you think it can happen? Or are you like, I'm hoping, fingers crossed.
I'm going to be a bit weaselly here, but not for lack of reason. So I think I like to distinguish between hope and optimism.
Okay.
So I have good days and bad days. There are days when I'm quite optimistic about my own future, humanity's future. There are days in which I spend the first hour of the day reading the newspaper and I stomp around in a depressive or pessimistic mood all day long.
I don't know what's worse, the fact that you get sad with that and depressed with that, or the fact that you still read a newspaper. I don't know which of the two.
Well, I'm reading the newspaper less and less.
As someone who used to write for newspapers, I totally am kidding, but sorry.
For much of my life, I believed I had a civic obligation to read the paper, and now I'm wondering if I'm not driving myself insane by following it. Sorry, where was I going with that?
We were saying that there are days when you feel...
Oh, yeah, optimism, pessimism. Yeah. So I recognize that when I'm feeling pessimistic, I'm often not at my best. I often don't bring the friendliest attitude to the encounters that I have. So there's something like optimism, like keeping a positive attitude is something we can deliberately do for the sake of our relationships and for the sake of our mental health. I think the concept of faith functions primarily to say, keep a positive attitude. Mm-hmm. It's healthier. I believe that I think that is true wisdom that comes out of the world's faith traditions. And I try to embody it by basically saying, I am going to be resolutely hopeful, no matter how dark things get. I'm going to remain hopeful as a matter of principle and strive to bring about the best of the possibilities that are out there. Now notice that resolute hopefulness can coexist with pessimism. Pessimism is a predictive attitude. I think things are likely to turn out crappy, but I can say, but I'm going to remain hopeful and strive my hardest to bring about to prevent the crappiness from coming about.
Right. Those
can coexist. And these days, especially, I find that I'm a combination of pessimistic and resolutely hopeful many days.
Are you still teaching? Do you still teach actively?
I no longer teach courses for Carnegie Mellon's.
Okay. How long has it been? Just like,
It's been a few years now. Since
okay. The reason I ask is I'm curious about I'm always curious about the next generation, because I don't have kids of my own. So I have to kind of like find out. So whenever I have a chance to talk to somebody who interacts with students, I always wonder like what you see in them, what's their attitude, what's their vision for the future. Do they have hope or optimism? What you've seen.
So I've observed a few things, and I've also done a little bit of reading about this. I think there's a lot of bright and talented young people at universities and colleges. I think some of them are really starting to get depressed about climate change and the apparent inevitability of disastrous climate outcomes. I think many of them are feeling betrayed by older generations and what we're doing to the planet. Some of them are so worried that they'll be about what's the word, about cancel culture, about being called out for having said something that's racially insensitive or gender insensitive or whatever, that they are reluctant to participate in class discussions the way they used to. I think there's been certainly an uptick in that kind of reluctance since social media came into the world. And some young people have become culture warriors that set out to cancel people they view as insufficiently woke. And that's a regrettable thing.
What about the professors? What about the teachers? Because there's so much fear of the same thing. There's so much fear of losing their job or being canceled, or, even if it's a hypothetical situation. I remember many of my favorite professors would create hypothetical situations to get us to think, to get us to consider things. And it doesn't feel like that is the same.
Well, I've read about professors who basically say, I'm not challenging students the way I used to and the way I want to in my teaching, because it's become so dangerous to do that. I think that's still a minority thing. I think most teachers are still doing their best to help kids think critically about these things. I never once got any pushback from students about my attempts to get them to think critically about religion and politics. And I mean, I got pushback on particular views, but I never got any flack for encouraging them to freely question and doubt and challenge each other. And I always had the support of the university administration. Like if a department chair heard that, heard that that a student had complained about a colleague's class, the department chair and the administration would say, "We got your back." Now, but that's not true at every university. Some universities, the administration doesn't defend their professors when they try to really challenge kids to think critically. And that's a really worrisome thing.
A university should just be, you always hear safe space. It's a safe space for the kids. Well, it should be a safe space for the administration. It should be a safe space for the professors. That's how I believe, because that's how you learn exactly what you're talking about as a student, by having a professor who challenges you and is allowed to create this sandbox. That's one of my favorite terms, is this sandbox where everybody can play and try new things, and it doesn't work, knock it down, build up again.
Yeah. And I've run into professors who I can tell within 10 minutes that if they do lead a discussion on a contentious subject, they'll do it in a sensitive way and in a way that they're just obviously not interested in indoctrinating or brainwashing anybody. Yeah. And then I know of a few professors who basically have like an axe to grind, and they want to teach to get their students to become active culture warriors too, to help prosecute some cause.
Yeah.
to fight capitalism or to fight the patriarchy or whatever. And um, by no means are all or most professors have that problem, but there are a minority, and they do things that the right latches onto, creates inflammatory stories about in a way that tries to make all of higher education look corrupt and propagandistic. And it's a huge lie. It's a huge disinformation campaign. But I regret it when the few tone deaf colleagues who are more interested in browbeating their students into a progressive mindset than they are about really teaching them to think for themselves. Yeah. Because I know they're just making all of higher education look bad.
Yeah. And then you have the other ones that are just there to do the class and publish their book, and not you, because my next question was about your book too. What has been the response to your book? Like, this isn't your first book though, is it? It's
the first one of any consequence.
They're all the printed word is very important.
Well, thanks.
How's it gone? How's it been going?
The book's been selling well, I'm told.
Congratulations.
Thank you. It's I've gotten a lot of encouraging feedback from folks, and heard from a few haters as well.
Yeah, you got it. I love my hate mail.
Do you?
I get some amazing, because I also work. I've done a few films, and I get some amazing letters from drunken college students who are like, "I feel dumber having watched your movie." A few prisoners in jail. I've got some pretty interesting emails that have popped up. So I feel your pain on that one. So you got to enjoy them.
But if you love them and can keep smiling through it, that's resolute hopefulness right there. It's you get a setback and you smile anyway.
Yeah. But I'm glad it's been going well. And you've been doing really well you've gotten some great interviews and some great press. And that's how I discovered you on
thanks.
On I'll drop the name I saw you on the Joe Rogan show, and I was just like, it was a long one too. You were like 3.5 hours, and I had to listen to it in shifts. I had
Joe
it on the car, and it was
Joe and I went at it for a long time. That was a fun one.
Yeah, But like I said at the top of the show, what really blew me away is you practice what you preach, and that really affected me, because part of the reason I started this show was because I felt like I was getting very stagnant during the pandemic, and the way that I learned as a former reporter, and I love to interact with people, and then suddenly that got taken away. Mm-hmm. And I read and whatever, but I want to hear my ideas come out of my mouth and actually take responsibility for them, hear other people's ideas. Yeah. And when I heard the way you did that, and you were, it was like I could see the wheels turning in your head, or I could hear the wheels turning, and Joe would hit you with something and you're like, no, this is it. Or then you would stop and be like, well, actually, I'd never looked at it that way. And that's what really impressed me. Unlike somebody who's just like, I have an agenda, I have a book, I have this.
Thanks for noticing. Yeah. My real deep passion is dialogue, the kind of dialogue that enlightens and ennobles all of us. I love a good conversation, and I think that I learn more from good conversations than I do from books, for certain.
Yeah.
So it's great for me to have opportunities like this to talk.
Well, I hope this was a great conversation for you. It was for me. I can only speak for myself.
Yeah, I had a blast.
I appreciate that. So Mental Immunity is available everywhere, pretty much. I got it on Amazon, so I gave Mr. Bezos a couple dollars. But I highly suggest everybody check it out. I'm really enjoying it. It's really opening my eyes to a lot of things. So
I'll add a very short plug here at the end. Thank you for yours. The book really tries to take on what I've come to call the great infodemic. Why is it that crazy ideas are flourishing the way they are, and what can we do about it? I think I offered one of the more practical approaches to solving our disinformation problem. And I hope if any of your listeners are interested in that problem, I think they'll find that a lot in this book.
Definitely. One of my goals is to get a former QAnon person on here and actually talk about that. So if I do, you're going to be one of the first people I reach out to, be like, guess what? I got go. So
okay, yeah, definitely put me on.
Andy Norman, thank you so much for your time. I really, really appreciate it. This has been an amazing conversation, and I know I got a lot out of it. I hope everyone did. So thank you very much. All right.
It's been a pleasure. Let me know when it drops, and I'll share it around.
Hey, Mike, weird things are happening, and we are here to talk about it.
Eddie, it's an amazing time to be alive.
Yeah, there are atomic plants sinking into the earth all around the world.
Yeah, there's also rumors out of France that these sinkholes are being caused by monsters.
And in China, I don't know if you've seen it, but there are sightings of what appear to be a dragon.
There are so many seemingly unbelievable things, and they're happening all at once.
Yeah, like there have always been rumors of the Yeti and the Loch Ness Monster, but it feels like this time is different.
Yeah, this time the monsters may actually be real.
So Mike, what does that mean for us?
Well, that's the question we're going to explore in our show.
Yeah, these things may seem comical, but they are anything but.
Yeah, no, our plan is to take these claims seriously.
How seriously? Super seriously.
And we're going to bring our new show to the masses. It's called
Super Serious.
We're going to have to work on that.
Our new show is going to explore the ramifications of a world where monsters and dragons may actually exist and impact our daily lives.
Yeah, so far these creatures have only been seen over in Europe and Asia, but our belief is that it's only a matter of time before they come over here to North America.
And we want you to be, you our listener, we want you guys to be ready.
Yeah, if monsters and dragons do exist, the world will never be the same.
And it should force all of us to reconsider everything that we thought we knew.
Right. I mean, how many of the stories and myths that we heard growing up from long ago weren't really myths at all?
If dragons are real, then what about mermaids? What about minotaurs, centaurs? What about the Hydra?
What about Hercules?
A few months ago, like asking any of these questions would have been insane.
Yeah, of course. But now things have changed.
And it's time to take these events seriously.
So that's why we want people to listen to Super Serious.
We will talk you through the latest supernatural news, but we're going to do more than just that.
Right. We're going to talk about what these new events mean for your everyday life and what's likely to come next.
Honestly, you can't afford to not listen.
That's right. 1961 is shaping up to be the most momentous year in human history.
The year may be coming to an end, but we are not.
I hope not.
You know what might be coming to an end, Mike?
What's that?
Our innocence.
Ooh, that's deep there, Eddie.
I try.
So listen in to Super Serious. Full shows begin next week.
You do not want to miss this.
That's right. Your life may depend on it.
Really, Mike? You think people are going to die if they don't listen to our show?
They might.
How exactly will that happen?
Ed, we're talking about dragons and monsters. Who knows what they like to eat?
Good point.
All right, so listen up.
We are serious.
That's right. We're
super serious.
Hey everybody, hope you enjoyed the show. Help us spread the word by subscribing and leaving a review. If you want to support us even more, you can find a link to our Patreon account in the show notes. And if you're one of our diehard fans, head on over to thevikingdogstore.com where you can find official Open Highway merchandise to show your support to the entire world. But most of all, thanks for listening.
For the highways of America, which for so many years were an assortment of as many designs and pavements as there were states, are now becoming one big road that can take you anywhere faster, safer, and more directly than ever before. What is this big road? Where is it going? How much has been built? How much is yet to come? These are questions we ask. Certainly traveling the entire system would be a memorable experience, but few of us have the time for such a trip.
All rights reserved. Viking Dog 2021.